Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer, thanks to ISAS24 for this one. A player says that they want to disturb their bait hook angler. Then their opponent says that they want to exile that bait hook angler using Scavenging Ooze. What happens? Okay, so in order to answer this question, we're going to need to know a little bit about how timing and priority works. Anytime two players want to take a game action, so for example, activating an ability or casting a spell at the same time, then they can't do it at the same time. Rather, the game uses a system called timing and priority to determine which of those players gets to act first. And it's really important what the answer to that question is, because if, for example, you were to cast a spell, like disturbing a creature, well, that means the first step in casting that spell would be to move that spell from the zone that it was in before, the graveyard, onto the stack. And once it's on the stack, it's not in the graveyard anymore, which means it's not possible to target it with Scavenging Ooze's ability anymore. On the other hand, once Scavenging Ooze's ability becomes activated, then that means there's an activated ability on the stack, and that probably means it's not going to be possible to cast a creature spell as long as there's an activated ability on the stack. So you can see that whichever player is going to act first is going to be the one that ends up winning this interaction. And so, as we talked about before, whichever player has priority at the time when this interaction happens is probably going to be the person who ends up winning it because they'll be the one who gets the opportunity to act first. Now, I made a whole video a while back where I talked all about how timing and priority works, and I definitely recommend that you give that video a watch if you need to brush up on that concept a little bit. But for now, I'll just say that if this situation was to happen in a normal game of Magic, then most likely the active player, whatever player whose turn it is, that player would probably be the one who gets the first chance at priority if this came up in a real-life game of Magic. So that player would probably be the one to win this interaction. Okay. So now that I've covered that, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that I kind of glossed over in the beginning, but it's actually really important. I said that when you bring a card back with Disturb, that counts as casting it with a spell, and I promise that's true, but the only reason that I can say that so confidently would be because I looked it up beforehand. And this is something that's extremely important to do in a game of Magic because this is something that has been done a couple of different ways. This mechanic where you bring something back from the graveyard, there's actually been a few different mechanics that have that same kind of theme, and they are all consistent in the mechanism that they use in order to do that. So, for example, let's take a look at the Unearth mechanic, which was recently re-released in the Brothers' War. And if we take a look at the comprehensive rules definition for Unearth, we'll see something extremely interesting. That being, the Unearth mechanic in its comprehensive rules definition uses a colon, which means that this counts as activating an ability. Since we're not casting the spell from our graveyard, we're activating an ability of that card while it's in our graveyard, and because we're doing it that way, that means that the first step is not to take the card from where it is and put it onto the stack. When you activate an activated ability of an object, you don't actually move the thing that has that activated ability onto the stack. Rather, you just create a thing on the stack that represents that activated ability. This is the same reason why, for example, if you activate an ability of one of your permanents on the battlefield, it doesn't actually leave the battlefield and go to the stack and then come back after it's done. It stays on the battlefield the whole time. And in the similar way, if you were to activate an Unearth ability of a card in your graveyard, it stays in your graveyard the entire time. The thing that actually puts that card back onto the battlefield would be when that ability resolves. And as long as it's in your graveyard, it's a valid target for Scavenging Ooze's ability, which means that it would be possible to respond to unearthing a creature by exiling that creature with Scavenging Ooze, and then the creature would not be able to come back when the Unearth ability resolved. The exact opposite of what we saw happening in the previous scenario. And the only difference is that the way that Unearth returns the thing to the battlefield is a little bit different from the way that Disturb works. Now, there's no pattern at all to all of the different ways that Wizards has done this sort of theme of a mechanic in Magic's history. So, for example, if you were dealing with something like Escape or Flashback, both of those would count as casting a spell from your graveyard. On the other hand, if you were dealing with something like Encore or Eternalize, both of those would count as activating an activated ability of a card in your graveyard. There's no way to know for sure unless you actually look it up in the comprehensive rules and understand exactly what the mechanism is that allows that mechanic to function. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.